Today, I'd like to start by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the lands on which each of us is for this meeting. In my case, that is, I'm on the lands of Macquarie University. That's the Wallumattagal people of the Darug Nation, whose cultures and customs have nurtured and continue to nurture this land since the Dreamtime, and pay my respects to elders past and present. If you would like to post the name of the lands where you are for this meeting, please feel free to post to the chat. My name is Jennifer Ruskin, and as I mentioned, I'm at Macquarie University, and I'm absolutely thrilled to welcome you all here today and to MC this discussion, the webinar. The purpose of this event today is to give an overview on how postgraduate students completing coursework degrees in Australia, how they're engaging with WIL and the outcomes that they are achieving. So we'll have about an hour for this event, and the format is that there will be a presentation. Denise Jackson will be giving a presentation, and that will be followed by Q&A. So if you have questions during the presentation, please do post them to the chat and continue to post throughout the event, and we'll make time for Q&A at the end. And as I mentioned right at the beginning, this event is being recorded, so the recording of the event will be posted to the WIL Australia website. And I guess the last thing that I'll say as part of this introduction is that I am representing the Professional Learning Events Subcommittee as the MC today. So during the presentation and when the slides are not being shared, I will probably take a few screenshots at different points, and those are to post on LinkedIn. If anybody is uncomfortable having their face on camera for that, please do just turn off your camera. No worries at all. And at this point, I am absolutely delighted to introduce Professor Denise Jackson. She is the Director of WIL in the School of Business and Law at Edith Cowan University. Her work focuses on enhancing student employability and career prospects. She is a Principal Fellow of Advanced Higher Education, and she is past president of WIL Australia, at the time ASEN, and her work has been recognized with 2 national teaching awards. And at this point, I'm delighted to turn it over to you, Denise.
Thanks, Jen. Hi, everyone, or morning and afternoon. We've got a bit of a mix here today, and lovely to see you all. Can see lots of familiar faces and names, which is good. And thank you for having me. And again, thanks to Jen for the intro there. So just reiterating a few things before we start. We are focused on coursework, postgraduates. We're quite interested to look at the impact of the change in the RTP funding on research postgraduates, and that's something that we'll be looking at later in the year when the new 2024 or the 2025 data, which covers 2024 graduates, will be out. Hopefully that will be released in the next couple of months. So we're hoping to run another webinar on that later in the year. If you've got any questions around the logistics or the admin of the items, if you could direct those via email to the admin. Actually, I think we've got a new email address for WIL Australia, so if you can go to the central email address, that would be good. Just also, obviously, we've gone through the rebranding of WIL Australia, but the dashboard that we use in Tableau is still saying ASEN, so apologies for that, but you will see the old name appearing on the slides. And also just clarifying that the slides and the recording will be available afterwards. So the purpose really for today is to provide benchmarking data for you at national level for you to then run your own analysis within your institutions and then compare to. So you'll have access to everything afterwards. And also just to let you know, and I will do this by section as well, that the data today is looking at international and domestic postgraduates until we get to the impact on employment outcomes. But I will just mention that as well when we get to it. So in terms of what we're looking at today, I'll just briefly cover the items. I think everyone is quite clear if you've looked at previous webinars or the reports about the GOS items that WIL Australia put into the graduate outcome survey in 2020. I'll then be focusing on participation in WIL before moving to the impact of WIL. So it's a fairly kind of standard format that we've used in previous webinars. So in terms of the items themselves, as I said, they went into the GOS in 2020. We had 30 participating members in that year, and then last year we had 36. So we've seen a slow rise across the membership. We're looking at around 28,000 postgraduates, taught postgraduates each year in the slides that I'll show you. I haven't broken down the sample for each particular graph, but if there's any concerns with the small sample, I will flag those to you. And as it says there, we did have a bit of a spike in 2023. In terms of the items themselves, if you go onto the WIL Australia website, there's a section called WIL and GOS, and you'll see all the summary reports. The full list of items are mentioned there, and they're actually in the appendix to all of those summary reports. So if you want to see what all of those 5 different items are, you can find them there. But in terms of how we define WIL or classify WIL, that's the first item that you can see up there. So when we talk about whether students are participating in those 3 broad different classifications of WIL, that's what we mean. And yes, they are. We could argue all day about whether they're correct or if there's overlap, but you know, that's what we went with. And for time series data purposes, that's likely to be what we remain with for some time. Just so you know, they're not mutually exclusive. So a graduate can say, yes, they participated in work-based WIL and they participated in non-workplace WIL, for example. Okay, so moving on to postgraduate participation. And just if you do have any questions, if you can throw them into the chat, and then I'll come to those at the end. So participation over the 4-year period that you can see there, just orienting you to the slide, because we'll be using this format throughout the presentation. So you've got obviously the 4 different years, sorry, is shown there. You've got your different types of WIL running across the top. You've got your percentage of the proportion of graduates that declared that they participated in that type of WIL. This is for graduates from all different disciplines that you can see here. So just kind of working from the left here, you can see that there's been a slight rise in taught postgraduates participating in WIL. I mean, it's not much, it's a couple of percent. And where's that been driven by? Really mainly by work-based and non-workplace WIL. You can see a slight rise in work-based WIL. You can see a proportionately bigger rise in non-workplace WIL. And we saw a decline in global WIL. Not a great surprise there, probably attributed to obviously COVID restrictions and then possibly the global experiences not fully returning to pre-pandemic levels. And also, I guess it's important to remember that we're talking about postgrads here. Thinking about our own programs, does global WIL feature largely in our postgrad programs? Well, clearly not. As you can see, the comparisons to the other forms. Still, when we take a step back, even though there's been a slight rise, it's still only around 50% of the taught postgraduate cohort that are participating in any form of WIL, which, certainly without making any major statements there's certainly room for improvement. In terms of participation by discipline, so you can see this is taken from the 21 study areas that the GOS uses. However, I did remove some, and I based that on where it's anticipated that they would have interwoven practicum. So that is disciplines that are health-related, social work, teacher education, and engineering. So those have been removed. And I also need to flag here, this group at the bottom, the tourism, only has around 250 postgrads in it. I decided to leave it in the end, but really treat those proportions with caution there because it is a small sample. The rest of them are not overly concerned with the sample size. So we're looking here at any form of WIL. So that's in blue. So if those graduates, 4 to 6 months post-graduation, post-course completion, we know that's when the GOS is delivered. From those different discipline areas, that is the proportion that stated that they participated in any form of WIL. And then you've got here that they didn't participate in any type of WIL at all. So you can see here quite clearly that one of the disciplines that has the most proportionately the highest graduates participating in any form of WIL, you've got tourism, noting my caveat earlier, and quite interestingly, creative arts and communications. But we'll see where that's driven from in the slides that follow, where we look at the breakdown of which type of WIL the proportions came from in those different areas. So lowest, you've got your humanities, culture and social sciences, also fairly low in law. So this is really, I guess, a call for action for institutions to have a look at what's happening in their own, in their own areas, and obviously look at the national benchmarks there to see if they're wildly different, and there might be a good reason why they are. In terms of work-based WIL, so again, you've got your different disciplines there. This is those that declare that they participate in a form of work-based WIL at any point in their degree. And then these are the proportions that didn't. So instantly you can see that we've got really around quarter of the postgrads, quarter to a third, stated that they participated in work-based WIL, and there's obviously range across the different discipline areas, which might be explained by a range of different factors. And again, this is, really welcomes institution level analysis. We can see that a low proportion, which I thought was quite surprising, but I'm sitting in a business school, was business and management. And also architecture and built environment were low relative to the others. We've got higher levels in psychology, but still only sitting just above a third of that cohort. We would expect a high proportion of tourism and hospitality if we think about our focus on practicum and internships or internships in that discipline. But again, just noting the small sample size in that discipline area. Nothing else, jumps out really there, I guess, apart from the range. We're looking here at non-workplace WIL. Instantly, you can see the bars are smaller. So proportionately fewer postgrads are participating in that form of WIL compared to work-based WIL. And I guess this is quite interesting here. You can see the creative arts and the communications. You've got high proportions there relative to the other groups. And that might speak to, certain productions that they run. It might be consulting or publishing houses, or a whole range of more innovative kind of different types of WIL that they're engaging in outside of the traditional placement. Again, you can see that there's a big range there, and you can see that there's lots of room for growth there as well. Thinking about our own in my school, thinking about our own courses and the scope for industry partners to come in and engage in projects and consulting models, and that's just in business and management. And I would say that would be, suitable for other disciplines. There's definitely room for growth in those areas. Global WIL, instantly when you look at the slide, you can see small proportions, which is the same as the undergrads as well. And there's obviously reasons around that. It might be around provision, it might be around take up. Postgrads are, often they might be more mature age, they might already be in employment. Ducking out for a global experience might be more difficult. Again, this is unsurprising here, the relatively higher proportion given the nature of those degrees. But again, we've got a low sample for tourism and hospitality, very little, less than 1% in psychology, and so on. So again, variability and less graduates participating in global WIL compared to the other two types of WIL. So that's for the whole cohort. Moving down, with those disciplines accepted, what I did now is I moved to a few student group participation by student group. Now, the data that's presented here is actually for across all of the disciplines, But what I did do is I did jump back in afterwards, and I had a look to see if these proportions were wildly different for when those certain disciplines that I'd removed earlier were also taken out. And the only one that there was a bit of difference for was by gender. There was more parity when I removed those discipline areas: health related, social work, teacher education, and engineering. But otherwise, the same patterns that I'm presenting in the slides coming up in the next few slides were the same whether you added those disciplines in or whether you didn't. So in terms of gender, so you can see here looking at any WIL. So we've got our 4 years here, and then we've got the different WIL types here. For any WIL, you can see that males participated proportionately less by females. There was a gap across each of the years, and it didn't seem to change much over the years. What was that driven by? And you can see where the differences are. You can see that proportionately fewer males participated in work-based WIL. And also, no, nothing else also, just that. So that difference is driven by work-based WIL, which might raise some questions, which I'm not going to attempt to answer, because I think, again, it depends on your cohorts and your offerings, perhaps. Why are males participating less in internships, placements, practicum at the postgraduate level? In contrast, there's parity or slightly higher participation by males in non-workplace WIL, and the same greater participation among males in global WIL. So I guess there's some things to think about there. There are more acute differences for global WIL. This is really marginal, the differences here that we're seeing, and there is, a fair amount of difference here, which is explaining the difference in our overall any WIL. So food for thought there, and probably one to watch. As I said, when you take out some of those key disciplines where you would expect work-based WIL to be part of them, there was more parity across the board. Looking at age, we're seeing a kind of consistent pattern here, and it's the same pattern actually that we see at the undergraduate level, and that is our older or more mature age, 25 years being the cutoff, our more mature age postgraduates engaging less in WIL, and actually it applies in all the different types there. And you can see the level of difference here. Well, looking at overall WIL, the gap doesn't seem to be changing too much, whereas the gap for work-based WIL is widening slightly over time. And that's, there's quite a vast difference there between our older postgraduates and our younger postgraduates. And like I said, we see the same pattern with our undergraduate data as well. Why might that be? It could be possibly that those of mature age are already in full-time roles. Perhaps they don't have the time to engage in work-based WIL. It might be that they're not seeking to experiment with their careers or seeking new opportunities, and they're quite stable in the work that they're doing. It might be that they have more commitments that might inhibit their participation in certain types of WIL. You'd think that would impact less on non-workplace WIL, but certainly it might impact on them doing internships. Or it might be that they need a bit more convincing about the benefit of engaging in these different types of WIL compared to those of a younger age. Again, something for us to have a look at in our own institutions and to relate to our own cohorts, I think. And remembering as well that this is all the different disciplines in there together. In terms of the next area, which was citizenship, so this is quite an interesting one. You can see the different gaps here, or there's a consistent gap between domestic and international graduates. And just so you know, we declare or we classify, or the Social Research Centre classifies international graduates by when they come in to commence their studies. You can see a gap that basically they were participating proportionally more than their domestic counterparts over the years, and that gap is widening when we look at any WIL. So how is that being explained in terms of, or what's the driver here? The differences in work-based WIL were proportionately smaller, But I mean, this is a bit of a good news story. We know that there's literature around at the undergrad level, certainly, that proportionately fewer international graduates or students participate in work-based WIL due to a range of different reasons, concerns with, cultural immersion, concerns with communication, employer bias, perhaps. So we're not seeing that at the postgraduate level. They are participating more. There's a bigger gap in non-workplace WIL, so your consulting models and your projects and so on, and also in global WIL. Instantly, when you look at global WIL, you might think it's because they're engaging in activities in their home country proportionally. Could that be skewing the data, perhaps? And again, that's really about looking at your own cohorts and what's happening there at the different course levels. This is different to undergraduates in the sense that this is the same, but this isn't the same. We didn't see non-workplace WIL and global WIL. We don't see these patterns at the undergraduate level, the taught undergraduate level, just to draw some comparisons there. Moving on to socioeconomic status, again, an interesting one in the sense that there wasn't really any consistent patterns across there. And again, when I took those disciplines out that I mentioned earlier, same. So yes, there are some differences, but I can't really see any kind of consistent patterns across the data across the years. And actually, this is the same for at the undergraduate level as well. So that's also, I would say, a good news story in the sense that there doesn't seem to be any impact from socioeconomic status on postgraduate participation in different forms of WIL. Just a bit of a caveat there. SES is measured by the residential postcode when the students are actually studying, when the graduates are studying, and that that's a fairly blunt measure. It's difficult to get. There's all different ways of measuring SES, and that's the measure that the department opts with. So that possibly might have an impact as well. So that's the data around participation. So moving on to impact, onto the impact of WIL onto taught postgraduates. So first of all, looking at preparedness. So just to clarify, this does include international and domestic graduates. The way the GOS phrases this survey, this item, and this is in the main GOS, this is not an item for ASAN, this is in the main graduate outcome survey instrument. They ask, it's for those that are in full-time work only. What this data shown here is for those in full-time work only, which is according to the National Reporting Conventions. And on a 5-point scale ranging from not at all to very well, they're asked to overall, how well did your qualification prepare you for your job, that being their full-time job. So what we've done here is we're looking at those that felt that they were prepared and those that felt they were, and that's very well or well prepared on the scale, and those that didn't felt that they were prepared at all. So that's the lower 3 points, on the agreement scale. So again, you've got your different types of WIL there, and then you've got those that felt prepared in green, and then you've got those that felt they weren't prepared in grey. So when you look at that, I guess one of the first things that's striking is how all of those that participated in WIL, albeit different types, felt more prepared, felt their course prepared them better for their full-time role than those not engaging in WIL. Which now, yes, there could be other factors at play here, but one reading of that might be that the fact that they had WIL in their course, they felt that their course prepared them more for their full-time role, which would be a good news story. And we see this also at the undergraduate level as well. And you can see that the premium is not small, it's around 10% when we look at any form of WIL. In terms of which forms of WIL were most potentially more impactful, global WIL, although the sample is lower there, and also work-based WIL. But even with non-workplace WIL, those proportions are pretty good. They're up there, which is good. And that kind of resonates with some of the findings that we found at the undergraduate level, that non-workplace WIL, while it might not be so effective in some things, and we'll see that coming through in a moment, it can be very effective for skill development. So that might be what links in with the preparedness there. There is one difference, I guess, to flag here compared to the undergraduate cohort. We have seen a decline in preparedness among the non-WIL participants over the 4-year period. We're not seeing that here. We're seeing the gap and we're seeing the premium, but we're not seeing a decline in preparedness, which was quite striking in the undergraduate data when we last looked at it. Moving on, this is where we're looking at a WIL Australia measure, which is the impact on 4 aspects of perceived employability. And those 4 aspects come from different earlier studies, so Bernstein and Markland, a key one. So they're informed by scholarship. So the first one that we look at is the impact of WIL on their labour market appeal. So the way that the question is phrased in the GOS is they rate the extent to which they agree that they will experience improved this particular aspect, and we'll look at all 4 individually. Obviously, there's no WIL in there because this question is only posed to those that indicated that they participated in a form of work integrated learning. So looking at labour market appeal, again, what we've done is classified as to those that felt that it did have an impact. So that's a strongly agree and agree, and those that didn't feel that there was an impact, and those are shown in grey. So, I mean, this is a positive result. More than 2/3 or around 2/3 are saying that yes, participating in that particular form of WIL, I think improved my appeal in the labour markets. So in terms of which types were most impactful, you can see here that global WIL is reporting along with or follow closely behind work-based WIL, seems to be the most impactful, and that resonates with the undergraduate data as well. And non-workplace WIL, albeit lower, it still seems to be having a positive influence now, which is good. The results are quite consistent over the years. There's not great change. There's no big improvements or falls for each of those different types of WIL. In terms of the impact on contact network, the same with the undergraduates. This is the area where WIL seems to have the least impact. So we keep seeing over the years this consistent result that out of all of the 4 aspects, this is the one where graduates are reporting that yes, it did help me, but it helped me less than the other 3 areas. So in terms of which ones were most impactful, then global WIL, which is interesting, I guess, from engaging with employers overseas. They felt that was valuable. And then we've got work-based WIL. I guess quite unsurprisingly, the non-workplace WIL is the lowest. If we think about those types of WIL, they are designed and structured. Well, they are certainly the ones that I'm familiar with, where the students often have less contact with an industry partner. There is obviously contact there, otherwise it wouldn't be a form of WIL, but it might be less, and on an individual level, it might be less, which might be why it might explain the lesser influence there on the building of their contact network. So that's the proportionately lowest percentages, I guess, that are reported for each of the 4 different types. If we move to the next one, this one was higher than the contact network, and it was also higher than labour market appeal across the different types of WIL. You can see that those bars have jumped up there, which is positive. And you've got, some of them, you've got almost 3/4 of the graduates declaring that they felt that participating in that type of WIL did positively, help them in terms of understanding what other organisations could help them or where they could possibly work. So it's really about building awareness within the labour market of their different career options. So in terms of what were the big, where were the biggest players is in terms of the type of WIL, again, you've got global WIL out front, followed by work-based WIL. And again, you've got non-workplace WIL. And that probably speaks to the point that I made just now about the level of engagement with the industry partner. And also engagement with, for example, if you're in an internship, you would expect, I suppose, to be interacting with external people from that organisation in meetings or otherwise, which might increase insights in this area. In terms of the final one, again, resonating with what we see with the undergraduates, this is the aspect which has the proportionally highest results reported year on year, and not much change over the years, but they're right up there, most of them in the 80s, low 80s. So this is, and we know this from the literature, we know that work integrated learning has an impact on a positive impact on skill development, and that might be for a range of reasons. It might be that they actually get to apply their skills, discipline related, and also professional capabilities. It might mean that they get to visualize the benchmark of what skills are actually required and the level that are required in their different areas as well. So, you know, and they specifically often they're designed, the activities are designed to get feedback on their skills. It might be part of their assessment or skill growth over during their experience. So I guess this is kind of unsurprising, but nevertheless, it's a positive result. And what's also quite interesting is that non-workplace WIL is kind of up there with the others. And that, even though this was from memory, I think we did look at each course level, the work that I did with Bonnie, Dean, we looked at again, this was GOS data, but this was when the graduate attribute scale was still sitting within the GOS. And unfortunately, they removed the the GAS, the graduate attribute scale from the GOS. So we can't see that data anymore, but that quite clearly showed that all the different types of WIL impacted on graduate attributes. We'll call them, that's how they're termed, professional, you know, capabilities, or whatever you want to refer to them as. And non-workplace WIL was up there with some of those skills, the foundational skills and the adaptive skills. So that's, you know, that's quite revealing, postgrad level and undergraduate level. Moving on now to the impact on employment outcomes. So this is WIL Australia's measure, and they ask, how did your WIL experience influence your employment outcomes? So again, we're not seeing no WIL people in here. We're only seeing those that actually completed a form of work integrated learning. We're also, now we move to domestic only. So that's in line with national reporting. So we don't include international graduates in the data for the impact of WIL onto employment outcomes. So you can see the different measures there. That's had any influence on job attainment. Doing WIL helped me secure employment with my WIL industry or community partner, or it helped me just generally because of the experience that I had, or it was through a network contact and no influence experience at all. Just to give you a bit of an idea, the sample size here is about 7,000 to 10,000 per year. So still fairly, you know, it's a fairly big sample, reliable sample. So we can see a slight growth here, but it's not huge. It's, you know, a couple of percent. We can see a rise here in terms of actually directly securing a role from their actual WIL partner. We're seeing parity here, no change, slight drop here, and here. So really the rise comes here from actually direct employment. We might look at this and find it rather disappointing, but I guess we take a moment and think, okay, this is at the postgrad level. And also, so what are those students doing? Were they employed during their degree? Were they already in a role? Did they transition straight into that role? They were still in it when they graduated. Remembering as well, this is 4 to 6 months post-graduation. So it doesn't give them a huge amount of time to secure that role from their WIL experience. I'm sure many of us are familiar with a WIL student going off when they finish and then being called back, or they've been networked into a job from their WIL experience, but it might be a year later or 18 months later, which does speak to the value of having a GOS instrument slightly pushed back from 4 to 6 months, but we won't go there. Okay, in terms of the impact on full-time employment, so this is a GOS measure that we're all very familiar with. This is those domestic postgraduates that were available for full-time employment, which managed to secure full-time employment at the time of the survey. So I guess if we take a step back, and this is all disciplines here, if we take a step back, we see, first of all, we see very high proportions. Secondly, we see a rise over time across the board. which is positive, and that probably speaks to labour market conditions. There was a rise over time in undergraduates. We've seen that in the last couple of years, and we're seeing it here as well. Obviously, we can see a bit of a dip, possibly, or lower levels, which might be related to COVID and the labour markets. But in the last couple of years, we've seen a rise. It'll be interesting to see what happens when the national data comes out and the QUILT reports come out, coming up in whenever that data comes out. Usually it might be in the next couple of months. In terms of the premium reported for WIL, what's interesting here is that there isn't really one. There, in fact, if anything, those that didn't do WIL report higher rates of full-time employment than those that did do WIL. So that's unlike the undergraduates. So why would that be? Again, it might be because those that do want to engage in WIL and make the effort to engage and want to include it in their courses, if it's optional, it might be that, you know, those that do that are not, they're experimenting, they're looking for employment, possibly they're looking for something different. Whereas those that did do WIL possibly might just be transitioning in the same role, which might mean why their rate is higher. There's not a huge difference, but it is an interesting finding. And I think looking at that at the course level within your own institutions or qualification level, because yeah, for some of you courses, this units might be of interest. I guess where we're seeing the real impact of WIL on employment outcomes, and this resonates with the undergraduates as well, is with perceived overqualification. So in case you're not familiar with what perceived overqualification means, in the GOS, they have 8 items related. They have an 8-item scale, which is an established scale. And from that, they have created a derived measure called which is basically classifying the graduate as overqualified or not overqualified. And that's really where the graduate doesn't feel that they're using their learning, their skills and their knowledge from their degree, and they don't feel like they're working at a level that from their degree qualification, aligned to their degree qualification. So obviously we want that rate to be as low as possible. So this is where we can see the premium from WIL. Those that didn't engage in WIL, you know, really around a third of them felt that they were overqualified in their full-time roles, whereas those that did any form of WIL, it's sitting less than a quarter. In terms of the greatest impact on perceived overqualification, we're reading the lowest levels from those that did work-based WIL. Not vastly different to non-workplace WIL, and again, not vastly different to global WIL. More variability across the years here in global WIL. So, you know, that's a good news story. I suppose if you were going to draw some blunt conclusions, we might say that at the postgraduate level, you know, we can really see the impact of WIL on preparedness, and we can also see it on their possibly influencing their ability to secure roles that are more aligned with their degrees than not. But again, there might be other factors at play. So that is kind of some blunt conclusions that we draw there. Okay. Moving on. So what I did do, because we could see a bit of a difference there, is I went through and looked at that perceived overqualification by gender. We can see that males tend to feel, just taking a step back and looking across all of those different areas, we can see that whether they did WIL or not, males tend to feel more overqualified in their roles than females. And that could be for a range of different reasons, which we won't explore now. There is some variability in the gap by year and also by type of WIL. But I thought this was quite an interesting one to flag to you. And consistent across all the different types of WIL and among non-WIL participants, you know, WIL doesn't really appear to alleviate that gap in any particular strong way. Looking at age, so again, we've got some consistency here across our WIL participants, and that is that those that were the mature age of 25 and above felt that they were more overqualified in their roles than those that were aged younger. We're not seeing that difference between the two age groups in no WIL. We're seeing parity. However, what we also are seeing is that those that didn't do WIL, again, as with you know, the group, the cohort generally, proportionately more felt that they were overqualified than those that completed any form of WIL. So we're seeing that same pattern, but we're seeing this kind of age difference here in the WIL participants and not those that are participating WIL. Again, you know, how is it factors at play for postgraduates? That is it those that are doing, the younger ones that are doing WIL, are they finding it that WIL helps them more? That particular form of WIL helps them more with securing a more aligned role? Is it because of the work that they were already, the employment they were already engaged in, and whether that transitioned after they transitioned into that after their graduation? Again, this is just flagging a difference for us to explore at our own institution level. And again, at program level, degree qualification level could be useful. Looking at socioeconomic status and the impact of perceived overqualification on it, there are some marginal differences by socioeconomic status here for work-based WIL and for any WIL, but there's not really, it's quite, and we've got some greater differences there. There's more variability on non-workplace WIL and global WIL. And again, more parity in our non-WIL participants. It's quite difficult to ascertain some patterns from that. It's quite varied across the years and by type of WIL were for these two. But I guess that's one really to watch for in future years to see if there's any consistent patterns emerging over time. So it's quite difficult to draw calls for action across all of that lot, but these were some things that jumped out to me. First of all, there's still only around 1/2 of taught postgraduates are engaged in WIL, and I think that's, you know, an area for us to consider and think about. Can we, you know, is there room for growth there, or is that okay for the cohort that we're working with and for our particular courses that we're offering? There is variability by discipline, and I would, you know, encourage people to look at how that is across their different programs at the, you know, at that level. There are proportionately fewer males and older taught postgraduates that are engaging in work-based WIL. We might also, as at the undergrad level, want to look at the contact networks in terms of WIL helping with that. I'm sure we talk about the value of WIL for networking. It's practicing networking capabilities, but also actually physically building networks. And we did see that, but we saw it less in comparison to other aspects of employability. So it would be good to see perhaps some growth in those areas. Lastly, longer term monitoring of impact of WIL on job attainment would be useful, or more digging down as well to understand the full-time there is no difference and overqualification there is, and what that means and what it means at the program level. So those were just some things that jumped out at me. And I'm moving now to questions, and I will unshare at this point so Jem can take her